Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome to the EduMagic podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
I'm Dr. Molly Ness, host of the End Book Deserts podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic podcast. My name is Sam Fessich, and I am here today with Dr. Dennis McElroy. And he is an amazing educator. We met probably, it feels like just a couple years ago. In Chicago, I think was when we first met in person.
That's correct.
But we've been connected for probably about 2 or 3 years through Twitter and through our work with the ISTE Teacher Ed Network or the ISTE TED Network. And he is a powerhouse of creativity. He teaches his students all about those ISTE standards. He teaches pre-service teachers along with other majors at the college in a tech ed course. And he is just a fantastic person that you guys need to add to your PLN today. So I'm so excited to have him on the show today. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Thanks. Can you share a little bit about your teaching story and what got you into teaching and education?
Well, you know, it's kind of funny. I didn't go to college initially to be a teacher. I knew I wanted to be a biology major. My high school science teacher had kind of influenced me that way, got me hooked on it. My dad was a veterinarian, so I was interested in animals. But I also was an athlete, and I started thinking about what I wanted to do, and the first thing that came to mind was I'd really like to coach, and especially wrestling. Now, I wrestled in college, and so back in those days, you had to be a teacher to be able to coach. Mm-hmm. And so I got into my intro to education class to check it out, and the rest was history. I got hooked with it, and now I haven't coached in over 20 years. So obviously that was the entry point, but wasn't the staying power.
Right. Right. Can you share a little bit about maybe those who influenced you in your early college career?
I would say the biggest influence that I've had in my career was Dr. Ann Thompson up at Iowa State. She was my mentor there. And during my PhD was my major professor. She was also on my committee for my master's degree. And Ann is just an absolutely amazing individual when it comes to instructional technology. She's incredibly passionate about what she's doing, incredibly caring, and she really was the one person that has pushed me farther in my thinking and understanding about instructional technology than practically anybody else.
I love when we can give back to our mentors through the field of work in which we study. And I think that's just such an incredible testament to their legacy and living on in what we do. And our future teachers are doing that as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today is years ago, when I first started teaching early in my career, we had a professional development exercise that they asked us to set a career goal. And back then I was like, oh, I need to write something lofty, you know, that sounds really great. And little did I know what I was going to write down that day actually would end up impacting my career all the way through, because I said I wanted to have a positive impact on as many people as I possibly could.
Oh, I like that.
And there's no better way to do that than being a pre-service professor, where I get to work with these people that are going to be teachers, and they're going to be influencing kids' lives wherever they land.
I wish you could see my face. It has a big smile, and I'm nodding my head. I'm like, yes, Dennis, preach. Yes, absolutely. Yes. I think that's just such an incredible calling to have and to work with future teachers. They have excitement, that engagement, that ability to change the world. And we are just blessed to be a small part of that as their faculty and at their institution.
Yeah, we have no idea the great things that they're going to do.
I know. Isn't it cool to think about? And then they connect with you like later in a couple years about the great things that they're doing at their schools. It's just so rewarding.
It is, absolutely.
So going back to that positive presence, that positive impression that you want to have on the world, can you share a little bit about one of your favorite teaching moments from back at Iowa State whenever you were studying to be a teacher or getting your PhD?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this question, two people came to mind, and one was a really positive example, and one was an example that wasn't so positive at the time, but it definitely informs my teaching today. The first one, being a biology major, I had to take a class in animal physiology, really tough class. And I can remember the day we were starting to study anatomy, and we were looking at simple things. So we're looking at insects. And this is a big lecture hall full of people up there. Professor comes walking in, and he's dressed up like a cockroach.
Well, I'm sure there wasn't social media around then, but if there was, I'm sure Instagram would have broken.
Oh, absolutely. And he did his entire lecture that way. And I've never forgotten his fearlessness of, not being embarrassed to do something like that that's going to capture people's attention and get a point across. And so that was a really positive thing for me. On the other side of the equation, I was taking an econ class, and it was a graduate assistant teaching it. Now, keep in mind, this was back in the 70s. Most universities today have an English competency and English speaking requirement to be a grad assistant if you're going to be a teaching assistant. Back then they didn't, and we were in the middle of a lecture in econ, and all of a sudden this grad assistant says, I can explain this better in my own language, and started speaking in her native tongue to all of us. And we're just like, what? And, today what that tells me is we have to be focused on who our students are, what their needs are versus what's necessarily comfortable for us.
Oh, I like that. And so how does that lesson play into your teaching today about meeting students where they are, not where we are as higher ed faculty, but really reaching those students in a place where they can understand and they can give back to you that information? So how do you use that in your teaching today?
I think two things. One is we have to get to know our students. Mm-hmm. We have to get to know their story, what they're interested in. And I've got several types of activities that I do in different classes that allows me to do that. But the second thing that's just as important is communication.
Yes.
So that when students are doing work and you can tell they're just not quite getting it, or maybe you see that expression on their face in class, something's going on. That might mean, okay, we need to have a sit down. And so you have a little private chat with them, find out what's going on, what questions they've got, what struggles they're facing, that type of thing. And that allows me to be much more effective. It allows me to be a compassionate educator.
Could you share, we didn't talk about this in the intro, but could you share a little bit about what you do today and maybe one of your favorite get to know you type activities that you can really work to get to know your future teachers?
Yes. And I'm going to tell you, I got this idea from a colleague of mine. She happens to be our dean right now, Michelle Dickey-Kotz. And I implement this in my general secondary methods course. And it gets the course off to a great start, and it allows us to get to know each other. But my first assignment is I want the students to come in on the second day of class prepared to do a 2 to 3 minute speech about one thing that they are incredibly passionate about.
Ooh.
And it can be anything. And I mean, they come in and it's all over the board. Some of them you expect they're basketball players, so they're passionate about basketball. Sometimes we have students that are parents, and I've had students actually bring their infant child in as a prop.
A great prop.
But they share, great prop, especially when I get to hold them. But while they're talking, I'm taking notes about their passion and what they say. And at the same time, in the margin, I'm writing, here's how I connect with that.
Oh, that's powerful.
And then what we do at the end, and I do a passion speech as well. And so they get to hear mine. And in the end, I go through and I talk. I look at each one of them and say, here's what I heard from you. And this is how I connect with you. And I share with them the connection, which allows them to get to know me a little bit and know that, once upon a time, Dennis was an athlete, or once upon a time, Dennis has grandchildren, these type of things.
Yes.
But it gets the class off to a fantastic start.
And how big is that class? How many students are in that?
That class typically ranges from about, on the small side, 10 students to, on a big semester, 17 maybe.
Nice.
It's one of those classes because it's secondary, unlike elementary education where when they're going to be coming into the methods courses. Secondary, it's kind of willy-nilly because it just depends on where it fits into their program.
Right. That is such a unique way for them. Now, my follow-up question is, before I get into my comment, is it freshmen, sophomores, juniors?
Typically for this methods class, it's juniors and seniors.
I like that you're still doing that connection and you're showing them and modeling them a way that they could do this in their classrooms whenever they're new teachers. And then you're also connecting with them on a way that's so meaningful in the beginning of that semester. I love that activity. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dennis.
Sure.
So this is the EduMagic podcast. We're going to focus on a couple of areas of EduMagic. Are there any ones that you wanted to speak to specifically?
The EduMagic book is just wonderful,
Thank
by the way.
you.
And I'm not just saying that to push it, but it's something that pre-service teachers need to have.
Thank you.
And when I was looking through the different sections, the first one that really resonated with me is the one on digital presence. And digital presence can be so positive, or it can be incredibly negative, depending on how you approach it and what you do with it. This is all about what I tell my students. This is all about your professional identity. And as a pre-service teacher, getting your identity established early on. It used to be you'd always wait until right before student teaching and say, oh, by the way, you should go out and clean up your Facebook. Now I'm starting this when they're sophomores. I start to preach this stuff. And so I always recommend students not mix their personal with professional. So when we start working with Twitter, I tell them, okay, do you have a Twitter account already? A bunch of hands will go up. How many of you use it to post personal stuff? A bunch of hands go up. I say, okay, you need to create another Twitter account.
Yes.
And the other Twitter account's going to be for professional use only. And that's where your professional world is going to be. And so don't mix personal with professional. The other thing about digital presence, and my students taught me this, and that is they referred to it as a social media cleanse. And I started asking about this. This was just this last winter. And one of the students in my tech class happened to be the student body president. And she was talking about this, that last summer she had shut off social media for a whole month.
Wow.
And just was a cleansing process. And that really resonated with me. I thought, there's some really positives, because at that point in time, most people know this, Facebook for a lot of people, I'm not picking on Facebook, but it's just one example, has gotten to be a lot of politics.
Especially here in the U.S.
And it just wears you down. And so I just thought, you know what, I'm going to try this. So back in February, I left my Facebook account, and it was just like this weight was lifted
Oh,
off my
wow.
shoulders.
Now, did you connect back
It
on the
was
Facebook, or are you just done with it?
the only thing I do on Facebook, I stay away from the general feed 100%. I do not post there. I don't pay attention to what's there. I'm a musician, and so there's one Facebook group that's for Southern Iowa musicians, and that's the only
Wow.
place that I go.
That's really powerful. And I think
And so,
the future teachers that are listening to this episode, I think that's something that we could all do to help us focus and reflect and really be in the moment with the people around us.
very much so, very much so. It changed. It got me back to communicating in a normal way.
I like that.
Yeah, one of the other ones, there's actually three of them that I really enjoyed. One of the other ones was uniting your PLN,
Right.
your professional learning network. And I have made creating a PLN my quest
I love it.
with each of my students. I mean, my experience with my PLN has been so powerful that it's something I want my students to get started with now. I don't want them to have to stumble into
Right.
it 20 years into their career. And so in every single one of my classes, we start the classes off talking about their professional learning network. And if they don't have one, if they don't have that Twitter account, if they're not following people, I make them get started with it, and I make them use that as a resource for a lot of the work they do in class. Go out to your PLN, ask them this, what kind of feedback did you get?
Yes.
These type of things. And so it becomes this really powerful learning tool for them. And they really, I hear back from my students all the time that how powerful it's been for them. Several of them mention your name. Yeah, they love the fact that when they connect with people that, whoa, these people that are known out there communicate back to me.
I was going to say, I know that being a connected educator is critical for all of our students, whether they're, sophomore, junior, senior, or, out there in their first year. But also part of being a connected educator is participating in that community, maybe through Twitter chats. Could you share a little bit about your experience with Twitter chats, and do you have any that you recommend for our future teacher friends out there?
Well, of course, right off the bat, the one that I'm going to say is the ISTE-10, the Teacher Education Network Twitter chat that takes place monthly throughout the school year.
Yes.
I love this one because of the group of people that it brings into play. These are people ranging from pre-service teachers through K-12 educators, administrators, and higher ed folk. And so it's a really neat mixture of people. The topics, I think, are engaging. And I've been very fortunate that 2 years in a row now, I've had one of my classes actually lead one of those Twitter chats. And that was for them to have to prepare for that and then to moderate the chat versus just passively being a part of it. Was incredibly powerful, and it allowed them to see this is what goes into this stuff, and this is how we make it happen. So that was very cool.
Oh, I love that. And I'm sure that was an amazing learning experience for them as well.
It really was. It really was. The other Twitter chat that I really enjoy is the formative Twitter chat. I am a really staunch believer in formative assessment. To me, it, in my mind, has a much more powerful role in the development and learning of our students than any summative assessment ever will.
Now, Dennis, before you go on and talk more about formative assessment, for some of the students that are listening, they might not have taken an ed class yet, or maybe they haven't gotten into that intro to education class. Could you share a little bit about what formative assessment is, and if you have any great tools or strategies to implement that into a lesson, and we can kind of gear that towards our student teachers listening?
Sure. Formative assessment are all the little things that happen, I like to say, informally, sometimes formally, but informally throughout the lesson. So as I'm teaching something, every question that I happen to ask during a lesson is formative assessment. Every time I ask my students, okay, turn to each other, talk, ask questions, share ideas, and then share them out with the class. That's formative assessment. It's so incredibly diverse, the different types of things that you can do with it. The nice thing is formative assessment isn't graded, so there's no threat to it, to the students. And sometimes it's so built in and so natural in the lesson, the students don't even realize the assessment's going on. Yeah, sneaky. Now, so the way I talk to my students about it when they're first learning how to write lesson plans, I tell them to consciously, there's one section of the lesson that we teach that is the literal step-by-step, here's what I'm going to do. And I tell them, don't depend on your memory to, oh yeah, I want to ask this question here. Write it into your lesson plan. What's that question that you want to ask? What's that activity that you want to do to see if they're getting it?
Mm-hmm.
And so build it in. I found early on in my teaching career, when you depend on your memory, at the end of the lesson going, oh yeah, I was going to do this.
Best of intentions, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So beyond putting in those questions into our lesson plan, do you have any technology tools that we can use to help with our formative assessment in our lesson planning?
Well, there's a number of things. It depends on what you want to do with the formative assessment. There can be ongoing things such as building in back channel chats.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there's this chat going on behind the scenes, so to speak. If you're one of those people that like to do surveys, you can use tools like Socrative or Kahoot, Quizlet, things like that to pop questions out there for people. So, I mean, the technology that you use really depends on what it is that you're wanting to do in the first place. We don't use the technology to come up with what we're going to do. We decide what we're going to do and then figure out, is there a tech tool that's going to enhance that?
I love that. Said like a true educator, using our pedagogy first and then finding a tech tool that can help speak to that.
Absolutely.
And I'll be sure to put in the show notes the links to those resources that you mentioned for formative assessment. Kind of got off track there, but I really appreciate that. Just in case some of the listeners need a little review session on formative assessment with some great strategies. Are there any other areas of EduMagic you wanted to discuss today before we hop into some great advice for future teachers?
Yeah, the last one I wanted to mention, because this was the one I think that re-energized my career. And that's the section on Get Out.
Yeah.
Isn't that what it's really all about?
Yes.
You think of the old model of teaching of you go into your classroom, you shut the door, you lock it, and those kids are yours. But that's the entire world to you right there.
Right.
And that's not what it's supposed to be. And for me, the first step was getting engaged with ISTE. I had been engaged with our state ISTE affiliate for a number of years, but there were so few things. There was the annual conference, and that was about it as far as engagement was concerned. But with ISTE, I decided one day I needed something to relight the fire, and the first thing I got involved with was the advocacy board. And back then, the advocacy board was a little different than it is now. And ISTE really engaged the people that were out in the field. I got to go to Washington, D.C. and lobby Congress.
Wow.
Things like that. It was just powerful. And then I get this email from a gentleman by the name of Randy Hansen.
Oh, Randy. We got to give him a shout out on the podcast. Randy Hansen for the win, everybody.
And I got asked, because I'd filled out one of those forms saying I was interested in volunteering. And he said, how would you like to be on the ISTE 10 leadership team? And I said, sure. And he says, we need somebody to do the newsletter.
and you said, sure.
I said, sure, why not? So, The neat thing about that, couple things happened. One, the newsletter, I've been doing it now, I don't know how many years, 5, 6 years maybe. It has unleashed my creative side.
Nice.
And so the newsletter has evolved over the years tremendously. But the other thing is getting out of my existing box and becoming engaged with the Teacher Education Network leadership team, which is a group of amazing people, as you know. But then beyond that, starting to get involved with other ISTE members through that, my world opened up. And it really, like I said, it reignited my passion for teaching. It reignited my passion for learning. And just for your listeners to know, I've been teaching for 37 years. So, sometimes we need to have our fire relit. And getting out of my safe zone, what I was comfortable with, really made a difference. So for those people listening, find something outside of your school that you can, actively get involved in, because it will make all the difference in the world in your teaching.
I couldn't agree more. And I love how you're taking that ownership, taking a risk, trying something new from the higher ed perspective. I think as faculty members, it's easy to get comfortable. So I think we need to get uncomfortable with being comfortable and really get out there and engage in our field in new ways and connect with others from around the world that are also, in our case, influencing future educators.
Absolutely. That we need to get people doing this right off the get-go.
And for those of my listeners who are interested in ISTE 10, there's a website I can link to in the show notes, so you can check that out. We also have a great presence at the ISTE conference. Next year is going to be in California. So if you're out there, look us up. And it's just a great organization to challenge and encourage and support your teaching in higher ed, and also with current educators too. So, Dennis, how can my listeners connect with you?
The best place to connect with me is going to be out in the Twitterverse. My Twitter handle is Acoustimac, ACOUSTIMAC. That just comes from a play on acoustic for music, for sound. Don't know where I came up with that creative thing years ago, but it's just what I use. I'm out there all the time. And so people can send me private messages. You can follow me there, see the things that I share. I'm on Twitter every day, and that's where I reside.
And that's going back and reaching our students where they are. They are also on Twitter. They're out there looking for resources, and by being a connected professor, we're modeling that for them.
Absolutely, that's very true. And I'll just tell you real quickly, I'm one of those people that I'm sometimes, even though I am this instructional technology person, there are some technologies I have to see the purpose behind them before I use them. And Twitter was one of those. For the longest time, I resisted using Twitter because it's like, oh my gosh, it's this short little message. What in the world can you do with that? And then because of the Teacher Education Network, I started using it. And now my daily visits to Twitter, it's rare that when I don't check through my Twitter feed that I'm not emailing myself 5 or 6 things from my Twitter feed.
I love it.
I'm actually going to start using Wakelet to catalog those things for myself. A little bit easier than just trying to email them. But every day when I get out there, somebody has shared something that I find of value and that, I want that.
Right. And I think you hit it right on the head. It's finding value and the purpose, and then really investing in it, investing in your own professional development.
We have to be self-driven. We can't wait for somebody to hand it to us.
This has been a great conversation, Dennis. Thank you so much for your time today. And I can't wait for my listeners to connect with you even more offline, off the podcast. So thank you so much for your time.
You are very welcome. And as always, it's wonderful to chat with you.
Awesome. All right, friends. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the EduMagic podcast. Remember, you have the EduMagic within you.
And there you have it, EduMagicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more EduMagic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram @sfessage. Until next time, you have the EduMagic within you.